Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, this is my second take. My first video was having a lot of issues on through, and my audio and video never really sunk in. So let's try this again. Today, I'll be talking to you guys about the stratification of classical theories on through. And before we dive in, we must talk about the individuals who actually talk about the classical theories itself. We need to figure out who is speaking on behalf. First off, we got Karl Marx. Karl Marx right here. As you can see, it's of course that peace sign is photoshopped on through. Mr. Karl Marx was born in 1818 in Germany. He was actually in the middle class, and the reason why the middle class is important is because all these sociologists had a different perspective, view, and or in their writings with correlations of what they wrote and how they wrote, and or who they were in favor or who they were against. But once again, he was middle class on through. He was a journalist deported into France, and then he actually moved to England. You can tell when he was in England, Mr. Karl Marx was very, very poor, and so his writings began, started favoring the lower class and or, on topics of the lower class, just dictating and differentiating the differences of what those classes had and things of that nature. Next up, we can see Emil Durkheim. Durkheim, I like saying that last name. As you can see, what does he look like to you guys? He looks like the typical father figure. And the reason why I say he looked like the typical father figure is because he is actually the father of sociology. This individual, we cannot put too much emphasis on what he provided to sociology in the past, and or it's ironic because everything that he has, taught us in the past is still current, up to date, and or still, interacting with our politics, economics, and things of that nature. Mr. Emil Durkheim was born in 1858 in France. It's honestly a very sad situation with him. We know that his writings weren't always approved and or allowed. He had very limited access. He was actually pretty much kicked out and booted off his hometown, and he lost all his friends and all his his spouse at the time on through, and you can tell that he had a lot of time on his hands. And with that time, he was, making a lot of theories on through that we know today. But this individual, Emil Durkheim, he went through a lot during his time. Next up, we have is Mr. Max Weber. And what I like about Mr. Max Weber is he was so in love with sociology that he found his love in sociology. And what I mean by that is, if you know Miss Marianne Weber, she is a feminist activist, very well known in her time, and he actually fell in love. One thing I like about Max Weber is he speaks a lot on the lower class and the middle class on through. He loves he loves differentiating the social classes and the economic statuses and the tiers of prestige from one to the next, and that's what I really really did like about him. Mr. Max Weber was born in Germany in 1864. He worked as an academic, and he majority of his time he was in middle class, but he was focusing back and forth on the lower class. He was an advocate and a value-free, pro person. He saw stratification in multidimensional phenomenon, class, status, and party. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Now, those three individuals are who we're going to be focusing on through, and the four theories that we are actually going to go over is, I'm sure you guys can see everything: critical order, critical conflict, uncritical order, and uncritical conflict. And as you see, we are going to go in that order as well. And, first we'll start with Marx, and then we'll start with Durkheim, and then we'll go on to Weber. Now, before we do dive into these four theories itself, we want to differentiate the difference between conflict and order. As you can see, the model assumptions is conflict. Human societies conflict with unequal power. Society is a scene for a struggle between classes and groups. And for order, norms and value keep the society together. And society is a social system with its own organism. With its own needs. Sorry, guys. Late night right now. All right, that being said, I'll go ahead and dive into Mr. Marx and the critical conflict all through. So the thing about Marx is conflict and domination characterized all societies except the communist ones in his beliefs. As you know, Marx, at the getting close to the end of his writings, he was very pro-communism, and you can see in his writings he talks about capitalism and feudalism, and how feudalism should go to capitalism, but capitalism isn't working anymore, so capitalism should go to communism. And we'll go more in depth here shortly. But nonetheless, one thing I really did like about Marx is he wanted to change society rather than study it. And so in his writings, he's actually pushing for, in his mind, a progressional state. The basic ideas of Mr. Marx was the economy is a base of a social structure. The substructure shapes the superstructure. Materials economics of a society determines the ideological economic, and society determines the the cultural aspects of that society. One thing he really does focus on and loves, repeating and or is known for his writing is the means of production, technology and tools, and then the relation of those productions, the relationships between workers and authorities, ownership, and distribution of goods. And just to recap, just going on through, so the Marxist theory and the history of inequality all falls back to feudalism is the land, the main source of income and nobility. Capitalism is the manufacturing companies of capitalist owners, and communism is the means of production, the industrial, but owned by all people in the state. Now, during this time frame of Marx growing up, the industrial for the European nations was skyrocketing. So of course it was brand new, it was different, it was the thing that was going to change the world at that point in time. Once again, from the transition from feudalism to capitalism and from capitalism to communism, he was more from that capitalist point of view and or judging and dictating how capitalism was a bad thing and how it would eventually fail, so we need to move on and progress to the next thing. That was one thing that Marx was pushing for very heavily. And just to recap right there, I forgot I had a slide that talked about that, but no worries, we did go over that as well. All right, next thing I want to go through is, let's just recap of what we went over. We went ahead and went over just a little bit of the, I'm going to need to save this paper because I'm going back and forth to it a lot. We went ahead and just did a little skim over the critical order, and we did the critical conflict. Now we're actually about to go to email Drachang and talk about the uncritical order and the uncritical conflict. But that being said, before we disperse in that, we need to know the difference between uncritical and critical. Now, the values of critical is inequality is not inevitable. Social science and social engineering. What they mean by that is they believe that, in the critical perspective, that inequality could be controlled. For example, we'll just use money and social class. You can control the amount of poor individuals, you can control the amount of rich individuals dictating and differentiating the necessities given to them. That was the critical point of, the aspect and the dynamics of that situation. We fall down to the uncritical. Inequality is unavoidable. That's kind of pretty much self-explanatory. Pretty much, you're gonna have and live in a world where you're gonna have people poor and you're gonna have people rich, and you kind of, that's the uncritical view, and that's the perception that they believed in and or try to come through as far as explaining their theories and things of that nature. But it's very interesting. We will come back to the uncritical thought later through this PowerPoint. Now, the Durkheim uncritical order. Once again, this guy is the father of sociology, and to summarize his portion of the uncritical order, as a society is viewed as a whole and is held together by a consensus. Inequality is necessary and fuels a social system. People require incentives, but can be motivated by proper rewards. Now, what they exactly mean by that is the fact that people know that there is inequality in this world will actually give them motivation and strive to have a better education, a better income, better perspective on they want authority and they want more prestige. So let's just give it to it like this. Let's say there's, we'll go back to the money and social class. This is the upper middle class up here, and this is the middle or the lower class. So the fact that the middle or lower class knows that there is individuals out there in this world that have more money and have more, a better lifestyle and or more, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry. More, assets and things of that nature. They're actually going to strive to get better and get that education more, and go get more money, and go get more and more. And the conflict that Durkheim is actually stating is that equality is necessary in order for the world to keep improving and improving and improving. And that's actually not that bad of a perception, but to me understands that it's just kind of ironic that you're saying that the inequality is good because it strives, it motivates people. Me personally, that actually does work for me, but I cannot speak on everyone's behalf. Going back through, so we kind of summarized Durkheim's uncritical order very, very briefly on through because he kind of goes more in depth. Well, I mean, it was kind of just an oncurring restatement and reassessment of what he was preaching. We kind of went ahead and summarized those. We'll go ahead and move on to the uncritical conflict. And this is for Mr. Weber. And once again, he focused on very direct the status, prestige, and the honors, the specific lifestyles that live up to the set of values, and the status defines group boundaries. Now, the thing about Mr. Weber is he also focused on the power in the party, the level of power in the hierarchy, and the organization in society. So there is 3 types of authority that Mr. Weber enjoyed reviewing and going back over. There was rational, the legal authority, which is normative rules, most effective, most efficient, and the traditional authority is right under that, and the tradition is back in the good old times, kings, queens, and below that there was the knights and the peasants and the, things of that nature. And last but not least is the charismatic authority, a specific person, and it's temporary. If we were to kind of summarize what the charismatic authority is currently, we can use the President of the United States right now. We do that. We do know that it's 4-year terms. It's temporarily, and or it could be 8 years if they're liked or wanted to, if they're voted in, and or even want to do the job. But that being said, we do know that with that title and with that prestige comes the authority and power figure. Now, going off that, before we do conclude on that, I do want to state that Mr. Marx Weber was very big on bureaucracy. And what I mean by that is the laws and the administrative regulations was well defined on the specialization for the expert training. And he pretty much was all in favor that bureaucracy was the best social organization. That's very rational. The most appropriate way to deal with problems in an industrialized society. Now that kind of sums up my statement on the four theories of four classical theories of social stratification. But I just do want to state that, even though, let's go do a little quick review. We had the three individuals on through: Mr. Marx Weber, Mr. Emil Durkheim, and Mr. Karl Marx. Even though Karl Marx and Mr. Weber they were actually good friends. They collaborated on a lot of stuff, but they also, discouraged each other's theories and or challenged each other's theories to actually reevaluate and, had them go back and forth. They're actually real good friends, though. And Mr. Emil Durkheim, remember, he was a father of sociology. One thing I really did like about him is, once again, that he allowed us and gave us the privilege to not only give us the tools that are needed in today's society, but he also did it so well that we do not actually have to experience those things. We can actually just open a book, review, and actually know what could happen and occur before it actually does happen and occur. But nonetheless, guys, it kind of sums up today's video on through. I got many more coming. This was actually my first video ever. So, yeah, appreciate you guys, and see you soon.